Welcome to another Fortuna Admissions Masterclass. This is how to ace international MBA applications. Now, INSEAD, LBS, Oxford, IESA, HEC, Cambridge have always had enormous global appeal. But you put Donald Trump back in the White House and then introduced a $100,000 fee for H-1B visas. And as you might imagine, MBA candidates from across the world, including the US, have been rethinking and for some of them reorienting their business school study plans. So many of those top schools in Europe are seeing a surge in demand. Now, with a team of former admissions directors and associate directors from INSEAD and LBS to other top schools, Fortuna already works with many of the successful applicants to Fontainebleau, to London, to Oxford, Barcelona, and beyond. Today's session is all about helping you to make those top international MBAs a reality for the year ahead. I'm Matt Simmons. I'm one of the co-founders of Fortuna Admissions, and today I'm joined by two of our superstars of the Fortuna Dream Team. Emma Bond, a former senior manager at London Business School and recently ranked the #1 MBA admissions consultant in the world. You've set the bar very high for the rest of us, Emma. And Caroline Diarte Edwards, a co-founder of Fortuna. She was the former MBA admissions director and financial aide at INSEAD. I think we once calculated, Caroline, that you had the final say on what was it, 34,000 MBA applicants to the INSEAD program. So you can imagine, viewers, with a team like this, we've got a lot to cover. And it's true, it's a very ambitious agenda. We're going to be looking at an entire sweep, thinking about the choices that are available. And of course, from the admissions perspective, what those top international schools will be looking for. That's where this insider advice comes into play. You couldn't hope for two better experts as you're navigating this entire process. We'll then go school by school across some of those top programs, and also thinking about the video questions that have been introduced a few years ago and that proved to be so insightful for the admissions offices. It's a lot to cover, both of you. I think we're both set, we're ready. And perhaps, Emma, simply that question, great schools, world-class schools, why choose an international MBA?
Hi, Matt. I think the best question is why wouldn't you choose an international MBA? It's always been true. We have some amazing programs here in Europe across the board. But I think, as you sort of mentioned in your introduction, this year, more than perhaps any other, even in my quite long memory now in the industry, we're certainly seeing a trend towards people who might otherwise have considered programs elsewhere towards the top programs in Europe. It's always been true that European programs have offered a really international focus and perspective in the classroom. They have, as Caroline will tell you, of INSEAD's one of its four pillars is the sort of global. All the schools have a global perspective woven through their curriculum, through their project work. They have strong international exchange programs elsewhere in the world, but they also recruit a very diverse cohort. So they actively seek out people who come from different cultures, but who also have that perhaps extra level of international exposure in their careers, perhaps even in their universities and their upbringing. There are many different ways that candidates can show that exposure. I think the length of programs, you'll see it there, accelerated programs, it's increasingly a draw for people. The traditional sort of 2-year model that is prevalent in the US. On a business school where I used to work, they still offer a 21-month program, but they, quite a few years ago now, introduced flexible exit points, 15, 18 months. And a lot of the European programs have a 12-month program or perhaps a 15-month program. So in terms of time out of the workforce, loss of income, return on investment across your program, you're still getting the skills that you need. You are still building the network, but you can do it in a shorter time frame. And we see that increasingly also in the US, obviously, as you know, when we work across our US schools, there are an increasing number of flexible, shorter programs there as well. building out of a global classroom comes a very global alumni network. So that means that as you progress through your career, you have touch points, perhaps in a wider variety of countries and regions than you might have if you have a sort of homogeneous class. There's also a link to global recruiters. So across Europe, the fact that it is so interlinked, sort of continental Europe, if you like, and the UK, very easy to get from one place to another. Most of the schools will link into the global offices of different organizations, but they do recruit very flexibly, the odd visa situation allowing across the different regions. All of that means you get an exposure to new cultures, markets, leadership styles, as it says there. One of the things I always say to clients in terms of the classroom is that when you are thinking about writing your essays or excuse me, the kind of peer-to-peer learning that you're going to get, yes, you'll learn all you want to know from faculty, but within the actual classroom, learning about how somebody who is from Mexico, for example, approaches problem solving or leads teams will be very different to how somebody does it from Switzerland or from Japan. So when you bring everybody sort of together into a classroom, you get that extra benefit as well. Kind of goes without saying, international careers, regional pivots, the international classroom, the international curriculum, that all builds towards that. And then I think I would hesitate to say that programs in the US and elsewhere don't do this, but as with most MBA degrees, certainly the European programs are very much about building your personal development alongside your professional development. And the global mindset kind of comes with that. And we'll talk a little bit as we go through some of the schools about how some of the European programs really tie into that idea of, I guess, a global mindset about values driven and how that sort of builds into their professional growth as well.
Right. Caroline, yourself, of course, a very successful career with one of the top consulting firms, with the International Monetary Fund around different parts of the world. We can look at Wharton, Columbia, and, we might see 34, 37% international students. Sometimes I think it's difficult for candidates to grasp just how international these top European programs are. I know I've got my T-shirts and notepads that talk about INSEAD and the business school for the world, but it really is an extraordinary melting pot.
Sorry. Yes, it is. And it really has a huge impact on the learning experience for everybody. And it's difficult to overemphasize how fundamental that is to your learning experience on one of these international MBA programs. And what I've heard from, for example, from professors who have taught both at a school like INSEAD and then a top US school like Wharton, for example, because there is faculty exchange between INSEAD and Wharton, that actually the INSEAD classroom is much more challenging because you have that tremendous diversity of perspectives. You can have questions and ideas and opinions coming completely out of left field that the professor might not have anticipated. Whereas in the US, there is more of a commonality of background and experience because the vast majority of students are coming from the US. And even a chunk of the international students who are on the program will have been working in the US, and they may have studied and had their work experience in the US rather than in an international market. So that is a huge element of what you get from an international MBA. And it's very challenging, right? So as I said, it's challenging for the professors. It's also challenging for students. I can remember being in a team with fellow students from Brazil and from Germany and from China. And as Emma said, people have very different ways of approaching things. And that's very interesting, but sometimes it's difficult as well when you're tasked with working together and coming to agreeing on a solution. And even sort of basic things like, if you agree a time to meet, what time do you actually turn up to that meeting? And how do you manage the time? And how do you manage the process, right? So it is challenging, and you will find it difficult during the program, but that's a big part of what you learn. And it makes you more flexible and adaptable. And that's something that that we also hear a lot from recruiters, and that's why top recruiters go to these schools as well, because they know that a student who's been through a top international program has tremendous flexibility and adaptability, and they can drop them into very different situations, and they will be able to hit the ground running, and they will figure out how to adapt and to succeed in that situation. So that international mindset and the flexibility that builds is a tremendous asset for your future career.
Now I have the answer of why you're so good at answering my questions that come out of left field, and all of our viewers too. Emma, perhaps a couple of other aspects. One, that course length, and you talked about a tremendous ROI. You know, you're going to work hard and you're going to play hard, but also perhaps now, as we look at certain areas that you might be interested in, whether it's climate tech, diversity and inclusion. These are themes that European schools have really embraced and anchored into their programs. There is no policy that's shifted any of that. And that can be very influential as you think about transitioning your career, a triple jump for some candidates. So lots of great options, both in what you can study and then the career doors that will open up beyond it.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to go outside LBS and INSEAD at the moment, which are still traditionally, finance and consulting schools because of their background, because of other LBS finance, other programs in the curriculum. But a lot of the European schools do have quite a niche in a particular area. So take Oxford, for example. And I think they were very clever, very smart, very forward thinking in terms of getting ahead of the kind of sustainability drive. So they started carving that kind of social impact sustainability aspect out for themselves, quite a long time ago now. And then, off the heels of that, what we see with candidates coming through is people who are super interested in sustainability now and climate, and obviously all these very global challenges that we're facing. So that's just one example of, yes, a program where they have sort of tagged, I guess, their curriculum, and with Oxford and Cambridge, particularly the interdisciplinary aspects of the wider university, into their programs. And it makes them very, very effective in terms of producing graduates, MBA graduates, and future leaders who can tackle those specific challenges that the world is facing at the moment.
Yeah, and we'll look at IESA later on, of course, that your massive web summits and things that they're doing in those spaces. So, of course, the demand is there, as we've talked about. How do we get in? So, Caroline, in terms of aspects that the schools, of course, they want to see that academic rigor, but how do you like to frame the lens that these top international schools are looking through to see the quality of candidates?
Yeah, so I think something that really differentiates these schools compared to the US schools is the international dimension. So if you've got international experience and you're applying to a US program, then that's great, right? They will still value it and they will appreciate the different perspective that you're bringing to the classroom. But it's not a fundamental element of what they're looking for. Whereas with these schools that we'll be talking about today, it really is one of the key pillars of what they're evaluating. And that's because, as we've said, these schools are very diverse. They're looking to draw on that experience of that students have of working across borders or living in different cultures, and they're bringing that into the classroom. So they're looking to see what you can contribute to the classroom experience and the learning environment of your peers. And they're also looking to evaluate, is it really, does it make sense for you to be part of a very international community? Do you have career goals that are aligned with being part of an international community? Because if your background is you've lived and worked only in one country and you plan to go back and stay in that country, and you don't necessarily want to be internationally mobile in your future career, then perhaps a more local MBA would be a better fit for you. So they are looking at that international exposure. They also understand that some people have more opportunities than others to live and work abroad. So it's ideal if you have lived in another country. And of course, it's not just about ticking off, okay, I've spent X number of months or X number of years in another country, but what they'll be really looking at is, okay, well, what did you learn from that? How did you develop as a result? How did that change your perspective? but maybe you haven't had the opportunity to spend a great deal of time outside of your home country, but perhaps you've worked in very international teams. Perhaps you have served international clients remotely. And so you can draw on that experience as well in your application. But the critical thing is showing that international mindset and that international motivation for being part of a very internationally oriented community. And then beyond that, of course, the schools are looking at elements that the top US schools will be looking at as well. So they're looking at your professional track record. They want to see a track record of achievement, that you have progressed in your career, that you have risen above the average for your peer group, and that you've really demonstrated that you're on a fast track, even if you're at an early stage in your career. Because admissions committees take the perspective that past performance is the best predictor of future success. So they're looking at concrete examples of what you have done and what you have achieved and how you've done that. And then part of that professional evaluation is also looking at your career goals. So they want to see that you have ambitious goals, that you really want to leverage the MBA experience and that you want to have an impact in the future, but also that there is some realism in your career goals, that there is some logical thread between what you've done in the past, what you're doing now, what you're going to learn from the MBA, and then what you're going to do in the future. So that you've got to strike a balance between having a grand vision, but also a realistic vision, and a vision that makes sense given what you will gain from the MBA experience. And they'll be looking at academic preparedness. So schools want to admit students who are going to succeed academically. And as Emma said, many of these programs have accelerated formats or offer accelerated formats. And so it is intense, right? So for example, at INSEAD, it's a 10-month program, but you will cover 80% of the curriculum that you would cover in a top 2-year US program. You will have exams every 8 weeks. There's no getting away from the fact that it is an intense experience and the pace is fast. So they want to make sure that they're admitting candidates who have the analytical ability and the quantitative abilities to succeed. And so they will look at your undergraduate track record and your GMAT or your GRE. And also, perhaps through your professional experience, you have demonstrated analytical qualities and abilities. So they'll be looking at all of that. And then they will be looking at your fit for the MBA. So they will be looking at more intangible qualities, so interpersonal skills, communication skills, team working skills that are such an essential part of being an effective and engaged MBA student. And then they'll also be looking at your motivation for that specific school, right? Because the school wants to know that you've really done your homework, that you understand what is special about that school, and that you have a sense of affinity with that, and that you have really made a well thought through decision that is the right community for you, and that that program will give you what you need to succeed. And also they're looking at what will you bring to the program, what will you contribute to the program as well. So those are the key elements, and the US schools will be evaluating that as well, but the key differentiator is the international element.
Right. Emma, in the senior admissions role that you held at London Business School, are you very mindful of crafting the diversity of that class and thinking, well, we could have this Norwegian specialist in oil and gas with a South African digital marketing executive and a banker from Boston and I don't know, a software engineer from Beijing. It was always thinking about how they would then interact to bring the best out of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that makes, I think, sort of working in admissions at a European school so interesting, as you get this vast, complex mix of people from different backgrounds professionally, all over the world. And you read these incredible stories, and you get to cherry pick effectively the people who really come together to make that very diverse community that you're trying to build for the classroom. And then, of course, once everybody comes onto campus, and Caroline referred to her study group experience, INSEAD, very similar thing. They're passed over to the program management team, and they sit down. They literally have meetings to sit down and to pull people into these sort of eclectic groups of very strong leaders a lot of the time, and then they say, you know, here's a lot of your project work for term one, off you go. And people have to learn to listen to different perspectives, think about different ways of working, and then produce a solution or an outcome. And it's the perfect preparation for going out into a global role in the world these days, where it's not just people travel, they move around, they work in different countries, and you are going to be working in an international team in all likelihood at some point in your professional career.
Caroline, you had described perhaps the second phase of admissions at INSEAD and bringing together a committee, which obviously you and other members of the admissions team, perhaps some voices from the career management services, but even faculty. And so this idea of an intense program, it's not you need to be a rocket scientist with the numbers, but a comfort level with those analytical quant skills, just to ensure that you're going to thrive, because it must be very difficult to catch up if you fell behind with numbers.
Yes, that's right. So there is no space really to catch up if you are not able to hit the ground running academically on a one-year program, essentially. And so longer programs are a little bit more forgiving and give you a bit more time. And so that's something to think about carefully, because for some people, a longer program may just be a better fit rather than the accelerated format. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist, as you said. For example, when I applied to INSEAD, I had my academic background had no quantitative element whatsoever, right? I had not done anything with numbers from the age of 15 onwards. But I had some quantitative element to my work because I was working consulting, and then of course I had to take the GMAT. So it's not that you have to have a specific academic profile. It's more about demonstrating the ability in certain dimensions. And there are a number of ways that you can demonstrate that. And they are looking at, it's a holistic review. So they're looking at your academic profile. They're looking not just at your GMAT in isolation, and they're not just looking at your undergraduate transcript and record in isolation. They're looking at it together. So if you don't have a lot of quantitative experience, or you don't have very quantitative academics, then that's fine, but you will need to show that you've got that quantitative ability through the GMAT or the GRE. So there is a forgiving element, right? You can also compensate for a somewhat less than ideal academic track record from your undergraduate years if you have a strong GMAT and GRE. But it's really about making sure that you give the reassurance to the admissions committee that you have what it takes to succeed academically, because the last thing the school wants to do is admit someone who's going to flail and struggle, and it's very stressful for everybody, right? Doesn't do the student any favors to bring someone in who's not going to succeed academically. So that's really a hygiene factor that you have to demonstrate that in your application.
Well, before we look at a handful of those top schools, bringing all of that together, sharing that personal story, and as we've described it here, Emma, crafting a winning application strategy. I know that both yours and the rest of the Fortuna team have just off the charts success rates with candidates applying to these top international schools. Talk us through also perhaps mindful of an order of doing things and how that's continuing the self-reflection, and you're building this bigger picture of the story you're going to be sharing.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of fit that we talk about all the time, and Caroline mentioned before, is that when you first start thinking about applying to an MBA program, you really do need to research. I think sometimes people underestimate the due diligence needed, and we'll have clients come to us and they'll start working, and we talk about outreach and connecting with the schools and having conversations with students and having conversations with alum. And if you can, visiting campus, it's easier in Europe because the distances are not so far often. But you really can't sort of go past trying to connect with as many sort of different points that different parts of the school as you can, because when you understand the program that you are applying to from that kind of inside level, then you are going to be presenting a stronger narrative that will link into the culture of a school. And as you sort of mentioned initially, lots of these schools do have a different feel to them. I guess the thing about European schools is they're all in different countries. So there is a different vibe to a lot of them. Some of them are in super big cities. Some of them are in very laid back kind of areas. Some of them are in satellite towns where they, Cambridge, Caroline will talk about in a bit, link into Silicon Fen here and the Cambridge sort of ecosystem. So they all have a different, I think vibe is different vibe, different fit, and it really is worth your while to go out and learn a bit more about them. We've talked a lot about the fact that you need to present a global profile for these schools. It is super important that that comes through as much as possible in the narrative that you put together. These schools are seeking people who genuinely have an outward looking way of perceiving the world. They are interested in studying in an international environment and moving into an international career and being able to connect with international recruiters. So that ability to adapt, to move across cultures, to work across borders, different regions is really, really important. And there are different ways you can show that. But the important thing, that's the key word, is showing rather than telling. So it's that idea of building examples into your application strategy. And as Caroline said, showing by what you have done in your previous life, if you like, as an indicator of how you will then take those skills forward, and it will enable you to move globally as you progress. One of the things we work on right from the word go with our clients, and it can be a really long lead in to submitting your application. It can be anything from kind of 18 months out, I think, is probably one of the longer ones I've had. But it's about making sure that the application that you finally hit submit on really presents you as an holistic profile. It's not just about the professional story. So sometimes people just think, oh, well, I need to put down that I've worked as a consultant for a couple of years, and then I've maybe made a move into a different type of role, and then I'm going to come and get my MBA, and then I'm going to go and do something else. But it's presenting who you are as a person. So what else is it that you're really passionate about? Do you have a side hustle? And making sure that all the different parts of your application slot into place in a way that makes sense for your admissions reader. Because when you are reading a lot of these applications, and when you're in the position in an admissions office, everybody reads a lot of applications. You want to make a coherent story that will enable the admissions reader first to get interested in you. So you have to stand out from the thousands of other people who are applying, who have strong scores and who have worked for good firms. But you need to have a sort of narrative that is telling and is powerful. And then you have to have these different parts that come together. So on the slide there, essays, resume, the application form, which people often overlook till the last minute. And then increasingly sort of the power of video, and as well as the pre-recorded videos, sort of perhaps as a part of the application. Some schools are now introducing them at different points. So all of that is really important. We've put on the slide there, balancing professional achievement with personal depth. It is about looking at what else you do. I did a mock interview for one of my Fortuna colleagues the other day for Harvard, and on his resume he talked about his passion for growing orchids, which was a really interesting sort of part of someone's I guess profile that someone might not think is relevant, but actually, what does that say about you? How did you get interested in that? Have you explored outside just growing them? Is it an area where you show curiosity, which is a really big thing for the HBS application? So there are little things that when we work with clients, we pull out that you might not think are important, but come together to present you in your absolute sort of best way to the admissions committee. And then of course recommendations, and I think I've done a couple of webinars on this now with you, Matt, about the pros and cons and pitfalls and trials of selecting the right recommender and what to do and what not to do, but choosing people who can really speak to your leadership capabilities and can back you in those stories that you're showing in the rest of the application is really, really important. And we talk a lot about people who are tempted to go for the CEO or the CFO or the C or anything with a C in front of the name, because it's kind of makes them attractive, and they think that seniority sort of will win the day. But actually it's the person who knows you well, who sees you lead your team or lead through a project, and who can show the impact story that you have made in your workplace. So there are lots of different cogs in play, and one of the things we do is try and work in a very structured way with our clients to make sure that they will fall into place, and that by the time you hit submit, you have something that really speaks to who you are as a person, but also as a professional.
You've reminded me, Emma, of not just webinars on recommenders, but resumes. There's an enormous amount of resource at Fortuna to look at schools and all aspects of the admissions process. Caroline, we often talk about enjoying this opportunity. You've been studying hard, you've been working hard in the first early parts of your career, and applying to business school is this rare opportunity to step back and really think about your trajectory and the things that matter to you and where you want to have impact. Could you tell when a candidate had shared that level of authenticity? This wasn't a GPT generated story because they think it would look good or this is what the school wants to hear, but they've really shared with you that deeper level of self-reflection?
Yeah, definitely that introspection does come through. And I think that process of introspection also helps with what Emma mentioned about how the different elements of the application need to come together and build a coherent picture of what do you bring to the program? What are the key points of your candidacy that the school should know about? And so it's really important to take some time to take stock of where you are, where you've come from, what are the skills that you've built, what are the skills that you need to build before you dive into writing your application. And admissions file readers can definitely tell the difference between someone who has probably worked on their application over several months and gone through that deep reflection process versus someone who has cooked up their application in a couple of weeks ahead of the deadline. And what we hear from our clients is that they really find that process of reflection that we take them through in a sort of structured way to be really useful, not just in helping them present themselves effectively in their application, but also to hit the ground running when they get to business school, because they have a better sense of who they are, what they bring to the program, what they want to get out of the program, and then where they're headed in the future. And so that really helps you to maximize your time, because when you get to these schools, you're going to be faced with a myriad of choices of these incredible courses, all the different electives that you could take, all the different clubs you could join, the different treks you could go on, all the social events, right? It's like drinking from a fire hose, and you can't do everything. So having that strong sense before you get to the school of what it is that you want to get out of it, what you need to learn, and how you're going to leverage that in the future, that will help you make those trade-offs and make those choices when you're on the program.
Right. Now, before we go school by school, just a final thought, Emma. You talked about researching, looking for that fit, looking for that alignment, both in the classroom, but beyond the classroom, whether it's London, whether it's Paris, whether it's Barcelona, that there are endless numbers of, clubs, treks, activities and things. So connecting perhaps, I don't know, with a recent graduate or someone in the latter part of the program that themselves is playing a leadership role. Perhaps they're the president of one of the professional clubs or one of the the personal interests that you have. Is that a great way to show the schools that you've really taken the time to get to know the culture through conversations that you've had with relevant alumni?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, it's has a dual benefit. One, that is that you can use it to show the schools that you have really understood why you are applying to this program and what the benefits are in the wider school community, as well as just sort of being in a classroom on a day-to-day basis. But also, it adds to your own understanding of where you are going to be. And this kind of, it links into what Caroline was saying about that sort of that understanding of what you want to do when you start the program. If you take time to speak to alumni or to speak to students, so you might be one of the clubs, often a lot of clients that I work with, they're very interested in women in business clubs or women in finance, so they're looking to sort of act as role models for women coming behind them. So they'll often get in touch with somebody. You can go through the school websites, you can speak to student ambassadors. The admissions teams will often put you in touch with the relevant person, and you can have those deeper conversations where you can speak to somebody who was in your position the year before, and who understands what it's like to be looking at sort of quite a few schools and seeing, where am I going to fit? How am I going to slot into this community? What is the value add to me in terms of the networks that I can build, the conferences that I can lead, the speakers that I can see who come to campus, the recruiters that I can link into. So yeah, it's definitely a really, really good way to boost your research, and really an important part of due diligence. But because all the schools have these very sophisticated CRM systems now, they will track your connection points. They will see the conversations that you've had. Some of the application forms ask you, who have you spoken with? And if you can't show that you have done that research, then it can be quite a detrimental, have quite a detrimental impact on your application.
So it's not enough just to buy the t-shirt, even if it does say the business school for the world on it. Apparently, Caroline, there is an unofficial INSEAD t-shirt that explains that I never sleep. I just eat and drink. That's what INSEAD truly
Right.
stands for. Working
Yeah,
hard
well,
and playing hard. Tell us more about the school and its culture.
yeah, it is a very international program, as we've said. It's a very intense program. So it's a 10-month program. You have the option of either starting in January and graduating in December, and then you take a 2-month break in the summer and you can do an internship, or you start in September and finish the following June, and then you go straight through without an internship. So that's an option to think about, because sometimes for career changes, it's really useful to have done that internship during the program. And as well as being part of a very international group of students, you can have an international experience during the program. So you can choose to either start the program in France or in Singapore, and then you can exchange. So you can change campuses. You can also go to Abu Dhabi for one of the periods. There are campus exchanges with schools in the US as well. So that can also really enrich your international exposure. And the MBA runs in parallel on the Fontainebleau campus in France. So Fontainebleau is a beautiful little town, about 70 kilometers from Paris. And obviously, Singapore is a very dynamic Southeast Asian city. And so the program is running in parallel on those two campuses at the same time. So you can actually take the program entirely in Fontainebleau or stay in Singapore for the whole experience if you wish to. But to me, that's a bit of a missed opportunity. I think it's great to really benefit from that campus exchange as well. So INSEAD is, as we've said, it's looking for the international element, the academics, the professional, and so on. They do emphasize maturity and self-awareness in the process, because they want to make sure that you will fit well with a classroom that is slightly older than the average for the top US schools, for example. So the average age is typically around 29, typically between 5 and 6 years of work experience. And so you don't have to fit that profile exactly, right? You can be younger, you can be older, but they're looking to make sure that you will gel well with a group that is on average around that profile. And the maturity is also important, and the self-awareness, because if you have self-awareness, then you are more likely to be a successful student, because you understand what it is that you're good at, what you're not good at, what you have to learn. You're better acknowledging where you might be wrong, right? And you can learn from others. And that does take maturity. So I think those skills are really critical to being a successful student. And then INSEAD serves as a tremendous springboard for an international career. So INSEAD graduates are going to take up positions in around 55 countries around the world each year. And INSEAD graduates work in many more countries than that. So there's a tremendous network that you get access to. Something to keep in mind as well is that it's a large program, right? It's one of the largest programs in the world. So each intake, and there are 2 intakes per year, each intake has about 450, somewhere between 450 and 500 students. And that's split across the 2 campuses. So the school is graduating around 950 students a year. So you get exposure to people from a lot of different backgrounds. You build a deep as well as a broad network while you're on the program. And then when you graduate, you're getting access to a large alumni network as well that is really geographically distributed around the world. And that is an incredible asset if you are going to be internationally mobile. And so just a point of comparison, so I obviously did my MBA at INSEAD. My husband did his MBA at Stanford, and we have lived in different countries. So we've lived in Paris, we've lived in India, we've lived in Indonesia, and he's actually drawn on my INSEAD network in those countries more than he did his Stanford network, because the Stanford MBA is quite a small program, and about half of the graduates stay in the Bay Area. Now I live in the Bay Area, and there is nothing like the Stanford network here in Silicon Valley, although INSEAD does have a pretty strong network here too, and of course has the San Francisco Center also. So that's something to think about, is what network do you want to have when you graduate, and where will it be useful for you to have fellow alumni? So if you are internationally mobile, that INSEAD network is tremendously useful. And then in terms of the application itself, there are several essays. But I think that that's a great opportunity for you to tell your story in a thorough and deep manner, so that you're not having to sort of be too reductive and eliminate some key points that you might want to get across about your experience. And the classic essay that INSEAD is known for and has had for many years is the candid description essay, although they did modify it a little bit earlier this year, because it in the past had focused on you as a person and emphasizing personal characteristics, and they've also introduced this element of you as a person and a leader. And to succeed in this, that reflection process that we talked about earlier is really critical. You can't dive into this without thinking through carefully what is unique about your profile. And this is when I think also coaching can help a lot to get an outside perspective on your background, on your experience, on your strengths, and how what are the things about you that might stand out compared to other people in the applicant pool. And because we have that experience of that breadth of the applicant pool, it's easier for us to see what are the elements that might stand out and can distinguish you. I would suggest not trying to say everything, and trying to summarize yourself. It's not a summary, but you want to get across some key points about your strengths. The question also asks about weaknesses, and this comes back to self-awareness. And a mistake that candidates sometimes make in answering questions, and other schools sometimes ask about weaknesses or failure as well, sometimes the temptation for candidates is to skate over that, right? Or to dress up a strength as a weakness, and sort of say that the common ones that people will point to if they don't really want to answer the question is to say, well, I'm a perfectionist and I push myself too hard, right? They're trying to make themselves look good. And that will just make the far reader roll their eyes. So do be honest here and be vulnerable. And it is, I understand that that's difficult, and candidates are often nervous about being honest about weaknesses or failures, but that's really a critical competence as a student, to be able to acknowledge that. So they are looking for you to answer that part of the question.
Yes, rolling eyes. You must have rolled your eyes from time to time, Emma. And perhaps some of the aspects that Caroline has just taken through for INSEAD, as we then think about London Business School and, of course, its location in a global hub like London, overlaps, but at the same time, very distinct culture. And I'm sure the admissions team at London Business School is really looking for those reference points that ties very closely to Regent's Park and the experience that LBS has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just looking at the slide with the wonderful Nash Terraces, the buildings in London. It does have a lot of crossover with INSEAD. It's a longer program traditionally. I think it was actually when I was still there that they introduced the flexible exit points that I mentioned earlier, to give people the choice. So if you want to do the longer program and take time, if you are perhaps pivoting to a different sector, you can spend longer during your MBA. If you want to graduate a bit earlier and get back out into the workplace, you can also do that. And the shortest option is 15 months. And there are some trade-offs for that in terms of, some of the program opportunities that are available to you. But there are people who do 15, 18 and 21. I don't think you can go past LBS's location. It's a fabulous campus. There have been some big developments in terms of new buildings as well in the last few years, but it is very, very well situated in London and very close to the city of London. So there is a huge link with very close links with recruiters in terms of finance, the consulting firms, increasingly tech, so there is a increasing number of tech recruiters. So it's, I guess with LBS you feel very much like you are linked in and networked into sort of London itself. It's very much sort of integral to the program's fabric, both in terms of careers but also in terms of curriculum. It means that faculty, many of whom are themselves kind of industry leaders, but they can bring people in very easily to campus. So there's endless conferences, endless speaker series, leadership initiatives, etc. So it's very much a dynamic campus, I think, because of its location. That definitely plays in. Collaborative, LBS has always liked to think of it as being a collaborative school. It doesn't pull away from the fact that people are very driven, they are ambitious, they are leaders, but there's a focus through a lot of the program on learning from your peers. That's very important there. So these study groups that I talked about, the different types of project work that you do. There's a module called London CAP, where you work with other students to sort of do a real world project for a company, usually based in London. And that is, again, a sort of opportunity for you to learn from your peers on the job, effectively, to come up with solutions to deliver to a client, but within a sort of small team, where you are understanding how somebody who has come from a completely different background from you may have different ideas, and bringing all of that to the table. Strong academics, absolutely. So you will need to have proven yourself academically during your undergraduate degree. And then that can be, as Caroline said, mitigated a bit by I think we've lost Matt, but I'm sure he will be back, so I'm going to carry on. So that will be mitigated by a GMAT score. What else can I tell you about LBS? In terms of global experiences, it's certainly something that is woven through the fabric again of the program. So one of the highlights is what they call the GBE, or the Global Business Experience. And people can do those every year for a number of different locations. They change year on year. Some of them are within Europe. So they have a one to, I think it's Stockholm every year, where that's quite a sustainability driven one. There is one to, I think it's Cape Town, where they look at sort of microfinancing small businesses. So there are a lot of different aspects to the sort of global side of the program, and that is very much sort of woven through. In terms of class profile, similarly to Caroline and what she said about INSEAD, the average sort of years of experience is about 5 or 6. Oh, we're back online. Hopefully Matt will be back with us in a minute. But it's a sort of class spread from sort of 2 to 3 years, but right up to sort of, you know, up into people who are heading up to sort of 10 years of experience. I think one of the things about LBS, which is worth saying, is also the idea of cross-generational learning. So if you look at the portfolio of programs that LBS has, there are endless acronyms. There's the MIM, which is Masters in Management Early Careers. There's the MAM, the Masters in Analytics and Management, Masters in Finance. And then there are senior career programs like the Sloan Masters. So when you choose your electives, one of the great things is the ability to sort of network with people who are at different stages in their career, and that can really give you a different perspective on your own journey in terms of sort of sharing insights and information. London's global business ecosystem, I think enough said really on that. It is a great advantage to LBS, the London advantage, the fact that you have that access to recruiters sort of on the doorstep. In terms of essays, so this it makes me smile, because for years LBS has had 2 sort of main 500-word essays. One which is a sort of goals essay. It asks you what you want to do when you graduate, how your existing experience plays in, and then how LBS will help you. And then there's an optional essay. But then a couple of years ago, they introduced this little 200-word question, which is what makes you unique. And I think of all the schools I work across, this is one of the ones that really ties people up in knots, because actually, even though you might know what makes you unique, it's quite hard to get that down on paper and share with an admissions committee in such a succinct format. And when I spoke with David Simpson about this, he's the admissions director there, when he introduced this, one of his worries was that it might encourage people to sort of just give another list of achievements, which is not what they want to see. They are really interested in learning something about you that is very sort of unique, that is more personal, that speaks maybe to your values, to these sort of defining experiences that you might have had in your life, and what that says about your ability to integrate with the program, and what it will mean for you moving forwards. So yeah, amazing program. I am very much an LBS hero. I'm a cheerleader, as I am actually for all the European schools, to be fair. But yeah, definitely a great school. Caroline, I'm going to throw it over to you for HEC Paris. You're on mute.
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, so moving on to HEC Paris. So HEC is a top business school that was actually established 140 years ago. So it has a tremendous history and carries a lot of respect and prestige, especially in Europe. Has a very strong and engaged alumni community. It's a 16-month program. You can also graduate in 12 months if you wish. You can start in January or September, so plenty of flexibility there in terms of format. If you do the 16-month program, you can actually do 2 internships. So I think that is particularly valuable for students who are career switchers. And the school is very successful in supporting students who are looking to make a career switch, whether that's into a different function, into a different sector, or into a different geography, or indeed across all 3 elements. like the other schools that we're talking about, it's a very international program. It's a very close-knit cohort. So there's typically around 270 students. So as I was talking earlier, INSEAD has a much bigger program. So the advantage of a smaller program is that you'll have a very tight-knit experience. You'll likely to get to know all of the students in your cohort and build really, really strong relationships. So that's something to think about when you're looking at which program to apply to, is the size of the program, because that does impact your experience. And the school, again, it's looking for strong career motivation. They're looking for a career vision of what you want to do when you graduate. The school is very successful in supporting students in finding positions both in Europe and beyond. So about 55 to 60% of the students do stay in Europe, and HEC Paris will support you with the visa process, and it gives you access to working across the European Union, which is a great advantage. But students are also going to work in Asia, in North America. So again, it is a global springboard. The application is quite interesting and quite French, I think, in some ways, in that there's quite a diversity of questions that is really looking to understand you from multiple perspectives. And so the question that I wanted to touch on briefly here is about the time when you faced an ethical challenge and how that shaped you. And this is an example of what we call a behavioral question, and it's really useful to understand these types of questions, because you will encounter them likely with other schools, perhaps at the written application stage and essays, but you will definitely encounter them at the interview stage. So a behavioral question is looking for you to identify a concrete experience, because as I said earlier, schools take the perspective that what you have done in the past is the best predictor of your future behavior. So they're looking for you to give a concrete example of what you've done. And a framework that could be useful for addressing this type of question is what we call the STAR framework. So that stands for situation, task, action, and result. So you should talk about the situation that you were presented with, what was the task that you faced, and then what action did you take, right? And that's really the critical part. What was it that you actually did given that challenge? And then what was the outcome? What was the result? So there's no right or wrong answer here, but they do want to see that you have been in challenging situations in your career. Again, they're looking to see what it is that you bring to the program, and what experience you bring that other students can learn from. And they're also looking for that reflection piece, right? They're looking to understand how it shaped you. So that ability to have self-awareness of being able to go through a challenging experience and learn from that is a critical part of, again, that being a good student and having a strong learning orientation. So it's important to understand the context of these types of questions. So I think we will move on to, if I can get the slide to move ahead. All right, over to you, Emma.
So ESA. So this is a school that has pretty much surged in the rankings, probably like the power surge, which I think got rid of Matt a couple of minutes ago. But it's gone from strength to strength sort of over the last 5 to 10 years. It is supported by the fact that it's based in one of my favorite cities ever, in Barcelona. But it is a fantastic program, and increasingly I hear from my clients how much they absolutely love their time during the MBA there. And it's a school that always ranks very well for student satisfaction. And I think there's a lot to be said for that when you are paying, a lot of money to study your MBA. 15 to 19 months. So again, a sort of slightly shorter program, but it has a little bit more length to it than perhaps INSEAD if you are looking at needing to explore a couple of options during the program. I think it was 2026 was the biggest intake ever for ESA. So they're certainly increasing their reach in terms of visibility, and these kind of strong FT rankings that the school is securing, increasingly sort of helping that along as well. One of the things that I think is really important to reference about ESA is the kind of values-based learning that the school focuses on. And I think that as things become more unstable politically, geopolitically around the world, it's a school that really has focused on trying to build empathy amongst its students and trying to position people to go out as graduates and really try and make the world a better place. And it sounds a little bit cliche, but it's very strongly woven through the sort of the classroom and the community at ESA. So they are looking to build mutual understanding and to sort of, I guess, increase the pool of people who can sort of build a world that's more harmonious, I think is how Paola, who is the admissions director there, puts it. It's a general management program, so they use the case learning method. So if you are very, very focused on case learning and you aren't that keen on heading over to the US this year, this might be a definite option for you. Again, in terms of sector background, they're very broad. They also have a class that comes in with different aspirations. They sort of want people who are realistic, but also aspirational. And that might be as an entrepreneur, so they have a strong family business cohort. That might be people going into more traditional routes, or it might be people who are looking to explore sort of new and burgeoning sectors, so health tech or ed tech or sort of climate tech, any of those. I guess in terms of global, yes, very similar to other European schools, but they're also focused very much on peer-to-peer learning. So again, the benefit of that classroom where you are bringing in an international pool, you go into a lecture or to a case-based discussion, and you have those different kind of viewpoints coming together, different ways of approaching problem solving, approaching leadership. So that's definitely a standout part of the program. The team focus is very strong, and in terms of study groups and the different kind of initiatives that come in from that, it's very much something that sort of is woven through again. One of the things I wanted to mention here actually is the admissions team. I want to give the admissions team, the ESA, a bit of a shout out. They are super high touch. All my clients that have gone there have found them really, really helpful. They are happy to chat, and they're really good at connecting candidates with people who are currently in the program or who are alum. So it's a good thing to consider. In terms of essays, yes, so career goals and school fit, they're quite what I would call traditional essays. They are perhaps, they have fewer than a lot of the other European schools. I think we haven't quite mentioned how many that some of the European schools have in terms of essays, but I think HEC has 6 or 7, Caroline, I think something like that. INSEAD has a certain number, and then LBS has a ton of short answer questions, which are mini essays in its application form. ESA is not quite so in depth with these, but they do have their case-based discussion, which is part of the interview, and they do have their admissions day on campus. So they have a slightly different approach, but it's something that makes it stand out quite a lot in terms of the application.
You talked, Emma, about how high touch the school is. And of course, there's a warmth and an availability among all of the schools that we've been discussing. ESA then also invites candidates to spend time with them on the campus. That's what sort of an evaluation day going beyond an interview?
Yeah, exactly. And they have this kind of group discussion. So it's a little bit like the closest thing I can think of in the US is probably the Wharton TBD, but this is actually on campus. And they do have them in different parts of the world as well. So I have clients who are applying to ESA from the US who will have that experience over there. So it's quite a unique part of their admissions process. And it's something that really gives people a chance to see who they're going to be in class with and to really experience that that particular style of learning. But yeah, I think they have a very a very high touch system, and they're very happy for people to reach out. I think it does differentiate them a little bit in terms of some of the schools. Yeah, absolutely.
You touched on the case method and, of course, the heritage of the school that involved Harvard Business School. I guess, Caroline, when we then consider the two top other UK schools, they have their own heritage. And if we start with the University of Cambridge, that you know so well, and judge how it fits both as a business school, but within this, very importantly, within this wider university community.
Yes, that's right. I think, you can't talk about Cambridge Judge without talking about the Cambridge part of it. That's really a key part of the experience. So Judge is a tremendous business school. And across all of these schools, of course, you will get a very strong foundational curriculum and a lot of elective choices that enable you to tailor the program to your interests. So I think that is something that you can count on across all of these schools, right? What is special about the experience at Cambridge Judge is that you are part of a very tight-knit MBA cohort, right? It's quite a small class size, so very tight-knit collaborative community. But as well as being part of that experience at the business school, you're also a member of a college at Cambridge. And so you have exposure through that college experience to people who are studying all different disciplines, right? From tremendous variety of backgrounds. So that's very enriching, and the school is very interdisciplinary. So you do get exposure to different backgrounds and people doing very different things that you might not get at a school like INSEAD, which is a standalone business school. So that's something that some people really like about the experience at a school like Cambridge. And then, of course, you go on to be part of the Cambridge Alumni Network, and the Oxford and Cambridge work together on a number of fronts. So, for example, on recruitment, the schools will work together. The alumni communities work very closely together. And so you gain access to this incredible alumni community, not just in the UK, not just in Europe, but around the world. So I have made great friends at Oxbridge events in New Delhi, in Jakarta, here in San Francisco, even recruited someone I met at San Francisco dinner. So it is a very, very close-knit and very enriching community. And Emma mentioned earlier that, of course, Cambridge has this wider ecosystem and what is known as Silicon Fen. So a very active biotech, high-tech community in the wider Cambridge area that you can tap into, and the school does draw on that for internships, for projects, and so on. So it's wonderful to be part of that. And of course, also you're very close to London, so it's about an hour train ride from Cambridge to London. And so that makes it very easy to access events that are going on there, or recruitment, and so on. So a fantastic opportunity to study at an 800-year-old university. Mm-hmm. And again, wide-ranging essays that give you an opportunity to tell different parts of your stories. And one of the questions I wanted to highlight is, tell us about a time you made a mistake. So I was talking earlier about the HEC question, which is a behavioral question. And again, this is a behavioral question. So any question that starts with, tell us about a time you did something, that is an indicator that it's a behavioral question. And so that framework that I mentioned earlier, the STAR framework, is a really useful framework for answering this question as well. And again, they're looking for that humility. They're looking for that self-awareness, that you can acknowledge when you've made a mistake. So again, don't pick something that only makes you look good, right? Pick something where you actually did make a genuine mistake. And anyone who succeeds in their career at some point has fallen flat on their face. You know, ask Richard Branson about Virgin Cola, right? Things don't always go the way you plan. And so it's fine to have made mistakes. What they're looking to see is, what did you learn from it? Can you acknowledge that you made a mistake, and what did you learn from it? So again, that humility and self-awareness is really important.
It's an interesting reflection because, of course, at the undergraduate process, Oxford, Cambridge, and how selective they are, and the room that all of these top schools afford to that vulnerability, you know, to a journey that we've taken when not everything always worked out. Perhaps that's also consistent, Emma, with another 800-plus-year-old university on the west side of London, and Saïd Business School, that again really gives you an opportunity to share that story and an intense year that you'll be sharing with what seems to be a growing school. I feel that they're on an upward trajectory.
They are. I would say they are pretty much equal with ESSA in terms of really forging ahead at the moment. And Caroline, you mentioned Cambridge being just a train ride away up to the east. Oxford is a train ride away up to the west from London. So again, like Cambridge, they do utilise the fact that it's very easy to get into London for recruiting purposes. I think I touched on earlier how Oxford carved out a niche, Saïd carved out a niche for itself in terms of sustainability, an upward trajectory in impact investing, in climate tech, clean tech. It has definitely become a school where people look to sort of integrate themselves into that kind of environment as part of their MBA studies. Like Cambridge, it also has the wider college system. So a lot of our clients, when they come to us, that's a really big part of why they want to apply to Oxford and Cambridge MBA programs, because they have that interdisciplinary focus. They get to join a college, they become part of that wider kind of history of the university. And that can be really important, and that can really kind of, I think, supercharge the MBA experience that these two universities offer. I think Oxford has perhaps one of the most gender equal programs in terms of, I think it's 51% women now, something definitely around that. So they've done very well at growing their female population over the last few years as well, which is always great to see. A one-year program. They also now have the Oxford 1+1. So similarly, to programs where you can do a one kind of different tagged on to the MBA. They offer the opportunity to do an MSc or a master's program at Oxford in addition to the MBA program. So it's a really great opportunity. I've got a couple of clients who are doing that currently. One I think is doing a super interesting master's or applying for one in I think it's the sort of sustainability of the internet or something like this, and then they'll be doing an MBA as well. So that's an opportunity for people who are interested in sort of building out their business experience with another area of specific interest. They are looking, as other schools are, for leadership, for global outlook. They have a very, very international classroom. Something like 97% of their classroom is from outside the UK. But again, sort of intellectual curiosity, and that plays into the kind of wider ethos of Oxford in terms of they want to see people who are curious about the world around them, curious about what's going on outside the walls of an MBA as well. Collaborative, critical thinking. In terms of essay, so Oxford is an interesting one because they sort of say on the tin that they just have this one 250-word essay, which is tell us something else you would like us to know, which is reminiscent of the old Harvard essay that they used to have. When you actually open up the Oxford application, there is a whole lot more inside. So please don't be fooled. Don't think you only have to write one 250-word essay, because there is a lot more in there. And depending on whether you put down your career goal as an entrepreneur or as working for a company or working from a family business, you will get a whole different set of questions. In terms of tell us something else you would like us to know, it's a bit like a sort of a golden opportunity to tell them something that is a bit different about you. So I've had people write this about being working at a very high level in sports, so a sports achievement. I had somebody who was I think doing a winter sport from a South African country, so it was quite a sort of hard push through different leadership attributes to get him to the point where he was able to represent the country. But people write about all sorts of different things, and it is a really valuable way to share a different part of your profile with the admissions team. But it's quite short, you have to be succinct, and you have to really kind of get to the point quite quickly. You don't have time to go down different avenues with this. So yeah.
It's interesting how we've talked about networks, both the global footprint of some of the schools that we've discussed, but also within an institution. I am, however, I'm a bit worried about that roof, and it feels that the brickwork is looking a little shabby. But we do talk about diversity of voices, and one of our viewers, Tome, was asking, he has a less traditional background, both in terms of the degree that he chose to study from perhaps a less known university than Oxford or Cambridge, and has been working in a local family business. Perhaps for all of the schools that we've discussed, how does he leverage that and turn it into a strength rather than it being a handicap?
Well, I can take that one. So I think that often it's the case that candidates with non-traditional backgrounds are concerned that that is a weakness and that they are a disadvantage because they are not a management consultant or they're not an investment banker. And actually, it's often quite the contrary, that it is wonderful because the schools are looking to build a diverse classroom. So they're looking to bring candidates in who have a tremendous range of professional experience. So that's something to really showcase rather than try to present yourself as something that you're not, and really be afraid that you don't fit a certain mold, because the schools are not looking for people who fit a certain mold. So the schools are looking to see if you have particular achievements, what impact have you had? And that can be across a tremendous variety of organizations. So I would encourage candidates with diverse backgrounds actually to be really loud and proud about having that different background, because that will bring a different voice to the classroom that the schools will very much appreciate.
And being loud and proud, because there is this dialogue, and it takes us now to the video components that a number of the top European schools have introduced. They really want to get to know you. Now, the video, of course, is giving that additional dimension between essays and application forms, but quite specific and perhaps to some candidates a little intimidating. So talk us through, Caroline. Kira Talent has been working with INSEAD and some of the other top schools for a while now. Talk us through how to approach the video questions and really shine.
Yeah. So you're right, the schools are looking to get to know you better in an unscripted environment. So of course, with a written application, you have plenty of time to think about it carefully and put your best foot forward. So the schools are looking to see how you think on your feet, how you communicate, because of course, that's critical to the classroom experience. And in some ways, these questions, especially these randomized questions, it's like being cold called in the classroom, where suddenly a professor will point at you and perhaps you haven't had a lot of time to read the case study ahead of time, and you have to have something useful to contribute or answer a specific question. So they're looking to see if you have that ability to think on your feet effectively and get a point across succinctly. So some of the schools have used only randomized questions like INSEAD. Some of the schools have some set questions as well that they will incorporate there. So they'll ask about your motivation for the school specifically. I believe LBS and Oxford have questions asking about why the MBA, why LBS, or why Oxford. But the point is that you will have a limited time to record your response. So maybe 60 seconds, sometimes it's 90 seconds. The schools have different parameters, but it's a pretty short time frame, and you will get cut off at the end of that. So you should definitely practice. You should practice getting familiar with that format, timing yourself. You should try to get to the point very quickly. A mistake that I often see candidates make is they give a very interesting introduction to their point. But they find that, 45 seconds in, they have set the scene and now they have to get to the point, and then they get cut off. So again, going back to, I keep going on about the STAR framework, but that can be very useful to help you structure your response to questions, because some of these questions in this database of questions will be behavioral questions. So looking for you to give a specific example of something that you've done and what happened in that situation. So practice is very helpful, and we do coaching sessions with candidates to help them and give them feedback. But also remember that it doesn't matter if your response is not perfect, right? The schools understand that this is a difficult format, that you might afterwards think, oh, I wish I'd given a different response. I could have said something that was so much more to the point. Most candidates come out of this exercise thinking, well, maybe I nailed one question, but another question, I feel like I fluffed it. That's very common. So don't feel that you have to nail every question perfectly. But they are looking to get a sense for who you are, your personality, the presence that you will bring to the classroom. And also for non-native English speakers, whether you can communicate effectively in English. And what I hear from the admissions team is that the admissions teams at the schools is that that they find this very interesting, right? So they get these short recordings. It's very efficient for them. It will take them only 3 or 4 minutes to watch those videos, and they can get a fantastic glimpse of who you are in those few minutes. So it's a very useful exercise for the schools. So it's just, definitely practice. But don't worry about a perfect performance, because it's very rare that a candidate nails every single question with this exercise.
In terms of getting a question right, often there is no one right answer, but you've emphasized that sort of interpersonal element, energy and warmth, things that they're not necessarily catching in other parts of interviews. So do you think that we'll be seeing more videos entering into the admissions process from the feedback that you've had?
Yes, I think so. They have become more common over the past few years. It seems like every year another school adopts a video question. So I think they do find it really useful. And it is tricky to show that warmth. And that is something that candidates sometimes struggle with, because of course they're not looking at an interview and speaking to a human being. They are talking to a screen. So what I advise candidates is just to visualize that there's someone on the screen, that you're speaking to someone who you know and you trust, because then it will help you to speak more naturally, try to smile, establish that contact, because there is a human being actually watching it, just not while you are doing the recording. And so it does feel like a bit of an artificial exercise. And so you do need to try to warm yourself up to being able to be yourself in that context.
We've covered a lot of miles, haven't we? We've been from London and through Fontainebleau, through Barcelona and back again. Perhaps as we bring all of this together, we talked about this tremendous appeal, growing volumes, demand, distinct personalities of each institution. Emma, as we bring all of those elements together, what would you want our viewers to really take away and be mindful of as they start their own admissions journey?
So I think for most of the schools we've talked about today, to really think about your sort of global value add. I mean, you need to think about your value proposition generally to the school. What are you going to add to the school community? How are you going to share your insights and engage with your classmates and your cohort? But admissions committees need to see what it is that you bring. And they're looking to assess you. You also need to assess them. But understanding how to showcase your any international experience that you have. And we've touched on the fact that it's great if you've worked internationally or you've been away and studied somewhere, but not everybody has that opportunity. Admissions committees at these schools do understand that. But if you don't have that experience, then try and think about how you can showcase that global mindset, that sort of outlook. Be outward facing, understand what's going on in the world outside your location, because it's definitely something that sort of all these schools look for.
Mm. In terms of Caroline, a couple of thoughts. We've emphasised the global mindset, the international credentials. Often candidates that perhaps don't have a job title that speaks to leadership, and I know that we spend a lot of time with our colleagues, Melissa, Cassandra, and others, to be able to reframe that and say, well, no, there are great ways to bring an international mindset. You may not have spent 2 years in Zurich or studied in Chicago. So lots of ways for a candidate to be able to convey the sort of qualities that we've been discussing in this session together, and exploring and reframing.
Yes, that's right. And I think that's also the benefit of these often somewhat longer applications, where there are a number of essays, as well as the video questions, as well as the mini questions in the online application forms. So typically the applications for these schools are a bit longer than the applications for the top US schools. And I think that is a benefit to the candidates, because it enables you to show different elements of your experience and really convey the breadth and depth of your experience in a way that perhaps you can't in a shorter application. So the schools are giving you scope, right, to showcase different elements of your experience and demonstrate qualities in different ways. And of course, some people come across better as well in a written format. Some people come across better in video. So the schools are also using these different formats to enable you to, again, to have more scope to tell your story.
Well, that scope and to really shine in this entire process, of course, is at the heart of what we do at Fortuna. And I think viewers, whether you've been watching this with us live or you're catching this on YouTube or another channel later on, this is typical of the time that we spend with candidates, bringing this level of insider insight to the entire process. I talked about my colleagues, this dream team of former admissions directors from the world's top business schools. So whether it's INSEAD and London Business School, all of those M7 top US schools as well, we've really got you covered. And it starts with a conversation, that level of candor that both Emma and Caroline have shared with you in the past 75 minutes. That's where we start with a free consultation. It's a call for you as you think about business school, next steps. We'll carefully review your profile and have a really in-depth discussion about personal and professional development and where you would look to then thrive in the next steps of your career and trajectory. So that free consultation, if there was a ranking, there are enough MBA rankings. I've been talking to the editors of the FT about that today. I think if there was the ranking of free consultations, I actually think that Fortuna would be off the charts. It is the industry gold standard. And with my colleagues, to be able to really look at that background and profile and provide lots of insights about your chances of admission to these top European schools and beyond. So feel free to reach out to us to be able to talk that through. Thank you for sharing some of your questions as we've gone through. I'd also just mentioned a wealth of resources on the Fortuna website, on the YouTube channel. So really, we hope that you enjoy all of that and bringing it together. There's the QR code, but perhaps it just remains for me to thank both Emma and Caroline for such an in-depth and wide-ranging session. I said it was ambitious, and you covered it with great elegance, even as I dropped out at one part of the call. So thank you to both of you for such a great session about the world's top international MBA programs.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Emma. Great to be with you.